Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a video talking about my top 5 Klingon books and series in the Star Trek books line. Now, there are like 800 Star Trek books, and not all of them have to deal with the Klingons, and certainly I have not read all of the ones that do deal with the Klingons, but I've read a decent amount of books, and the Klingons are my favorite species in Star Trek to follow. I love following their storylines in the books and in the TV shows. I'm most interested in their culture and the way that their history and all that type of stuff, and their religion, so I really enjoy the Klingons as characters, and so anytime I have an opportunity to read a Klingon-focused story, I'm really excited. And I have 4 either standalone books or books in a series that I think are some of the top Klingon stories. And if you want good Klingon stories, I recommend these books. And these books aren't necessarily all 5-star books, but the way they handle Klingons, to me, is top tier. And that's why I'm talking about them. For instance, there are other books that have Klingons in them or even focus on Klingons where the book's really good, but the focus on the Klingons isn't necessarily the best part of the book. So you'll understand as I go through. My number 5 is actually a novelization, and that is the book Star Trek Klingon. Pfft, what a book to start my Star Trek Klingon discussion, to start with the book Star Trek Klingon. This is a novelization of the CD-ROM video game. Basically, it was like a click-and-play video game that you could play. The video game was actually directed by Jonathan Frakes, which was pretty cool. But this is a video game that was released, I want to say either late 90s or early 2000s. And it is following, the book actually has 2 things going on. One is in the present day, it's following Gowron as he's talking with the leadership of Deep Space Nine and the Next Generation. And Jean-Luc Picard. He's talking to them about this old Klingon story, and he's trying to make them understand Klingon culture, why Klingons make the decisions they do. And so that's like the frame story. Then the actual meat of the story is about this Klingon house and some warriors, and it just, no book to me gets Klingon culture and Klingon aspects better than this. The novelization was by Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, and then the script for the game was by Hilary Bader, and then the story for that game was Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush. So this was very enjoyable. It's not a top tier book. I have a review of this on the channel. You can understand I talk about the cons of this book, but it's still very good Klingon story. Next, I have 3 books from the A Time2 series. Now, I'm not recommending the entire A Time2 series, which I think was like 9 books long, because A, not all those books are good. B, not all the books are relevant to what I'm talking about. So there are 3 books that have to do with Klingons and deal with the Klingons as major characters. And those are the books A Time to Heal by David Mack, A Time to Kill, also David Mack, and then A Time for War, A Time for Peace by Keith R.A. DeCandido. And the Klingons involved in these stories and the focus on Klingons, particularly in A Time to Kill, which I think is the best example of it, but also A Time for War and Time for Peace is also good, as is Time for Heal. These are all great books, but these books deal with more of like a political thriller element regarding the Klingons, and you see a little bit about their culture in here, but that's my number 4. My number 3 best one, and we're getting into top-tier Star Trek stories here, is Kahless from the Next Generation line by Michael Jan Friedman. This is a standalone Star Trek novel. I would describe this as if Star Trek turned into an epic fantasy, because this book, again, has 2 different plot lines. You have Kahless, the clone, who is dealing with a potential coup from other Klingons, and Picard and Worf are trying to help him out. At the same time, you read in the book about the actual Kahless, the original Kahless, and how he dealt with power, how he kind of became a big military leader, and all this stuff, and the flashback story with the original Kahless it's just epic fantasy gold. And if they had chosen to continue this on, I would have loved it. If Michael Jan Friedman announced that he was doing like a trilogy of Star Trek novels that were with this premise, just telling Klingon lines, I would invest heavily into that trilogy because it's amazing. And this was, I believe, it was also hardcover, and the hardcover cover doesn't look as good. This one's actually pretty not bad, but just this Kalis story. This Kalis story is just superb. I love this, and it's, again, really gets Klingon culture well. One of the best Klingon writers in the Star Trek novel line is Keith DeCandido. In fact, he was known as the Klingon guy for a while because he wrote a ton of books featuring the Klingons. And there is no better example of his Klingon writing than his IKS Gorkin series. Now, he has 3 books in that series. You have A Good Day to Die and Honor Bound, which is kind of like a two-parter. And then you have Enemy Territory, which is the 3rd book. And there is a spin-off book to this series, but I'm talking about these 3. And while books 1 and 2 are top tier, some of the best Star Trek books ever written, and book 3 is just, it was okay, it was interesting. What this series does is it is entirely told from the Klingons' perspective, except for Worf showing up in just a few bit parts. This is entirely told from the Klingons' perspective. There is no Starfleet, there is no Federation, there's no nothing about any of that in this book. This is, if you want pure Klingon stories, this is pure Klingon stories. And it's called the IKS Gorkin because the ship is the Gorkin, not about the character of the Gorkin. And this is set, after the events of DS9 and the whole Dominion War. And basically this this series is about the Klingon forces are sent out to go find new worlds to conquer, to add to theirs after they lost so many people and so many worlds and so many resources during the Dominion War. And we follow the Gorkin as it deals with one storyline in the first 2 books and then a second storyline in the 3rd book. And it just, again, the way it deals with Klingons is so great. There's even pronunciation guides in the backs of books 2 and 3 that explain how to pronounce the words, what the words mean. It gives you history on the Klingon chancellors. It's great books, great Klingon stories here, which is why this is my number 2 in my ranking. For my number 1 best Klingon story, and I will get such flack for this because this is my number 1 Star Trek series of all time, my number Star Trek author, my number 1 Star Trek story, books or movies or TV shows. You put books, movies, TV shows all together, this trilogy is still the absolute number 1 for me. I love it. I talk about it all the time when I talk about Star Trek. I'm sure people get annoyed about me talking about it, but it's just the best. And that is John Jackson Miller's Prey trilogy. You have the first book, Hell's Heart. You have the second book, The Jackal's Trick. And you have the 3rd book, The Hall of Heroes. And this is a trilogy that covers timeline with the original series era with the movies, and then it also has a little bit of timeline in the Next Generation era, and that's the primary timeline. And what this trilogy is after Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, you had Krug. You had Krug, who is the I want Genesis guy, and after he dies, his house goes into chaos and is not really talked about in Star Trek for like 100 years. And at the 100-year anniversary of the events of The Search for Spock, the House of Krug reunites, only to be slaughtered. And someone takes over the house, and it is a brilliant political story. You really understand Klingons, specifically Klingons who have been cast out of society, because this book deals with those who were basically kicked out of Klingon, who were discommendated. And just, you have Worf, Kalis are main characters here. You have the discommendated Klingons, the House of Krug. The villain in this series, Korg, is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Star Trek villain. It's amazing. I cannot sing the praises of this trilogy enough. And so, if you want good Star Trek Klingon stories, these are the number 1. These are amazing. And I wish John Jackson Miller had more time in the post-Nemesis universe to write more novels, because he's just a fantastic author. And so that is my top 5 Star Trek Klingon stories. Stories that focus on the Klingons specifically or have Klingon major plot points. So if you've read any of these, let me know. Do you agree? Are these good Klingon stories? Or are you like, nah, I would have included these other books instead? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.